All right, Commission President Rachel L. Smith, we're ready whenever you are.
All right. Today is Tuesday, October 13th, 2020. This is the City Commission work session. Will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Mayor Dan Holliday is absent this evening, and Commission President Rachel L. Smith.
Here. All right, so the first item up is future agenda items. Mr. Conkle.
Thank you. So for the November work session, we're tentatively scheduled for a discussion and update on the construction excise tax, policies for nonprofits, the pre-application request for recording follow-up from earlier this year, and then we're actually going to probably slide the marijuana tax and funds from the tax discussion in there, as I believe that probably links a little bit to the policies for nonprofits that we were discussing.
Are they interrelated?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are they? I don't, not historically, but I think it's part of the discussion was the marijuana funds and nonprofits asking for those funds to be allocated.
We've seen people in search of those funds,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
and we may as well address it as a package.
Yeah. Okay.
Are there any other comments from the commission on this item of agenda items?
Well, maybe, we only put 1 month, maybe a proposed second month, so we can comment on it in the future, but not tonight. Sort of like on deck, what are we seeing next? And then if we felt strongly that something needed to be bumped, that would give us time to do it.
Are you asking that the next
I'm
staff
asking
report?
for that in the future, like, here's the next one, and our proposal, it looks like the one
Or like
after
the
we're gonna
following.
do this. And
Right.
does anybody have any thoughts about that? And if I need majority of the commission to give that direction, I'm asking for it. It only gives us an opportunity to say if there's more pressing issues or not.
Right. So the ones that you have in the next month's section, I think you pretty well know about. They're pretty well planned. Mostly. I'm just wondering because if you were to go further out.
Right, it's
it would be-
difficult into the December work session. A lot of it just depends on what's coming up on the regular agenda that really drives some of that work. I mean, we could put something together as long as we all just realize it's 2 months, at 2 months out, it's pretty tentative.
That's right.
As to what.
Tentative but proposed,
Yep.
It's not a firm
I don't have a problem with it. I think it's just more of,
As long as we have an understanding of
Yeah,
how,
that-
that's what I was wondering of how tentative it would need to be.
I think it's pretty fluid depending on workflow or issues that come up, or, if something gets continued at a city commission meeting, it's really a staffing issue at that point.
Okay, anything else?
Yes, just a question. There are several on here that I see that we had talked about previously, so some of those would also be classified as follow-up. Would that be like the cross-street utility pole banner? I know we talked a little bit about the park special event fees in the past, boat ramp. Some of those are not new. They're stuff we talked about, and they're coming around the corner again.
Yes.
Okay. I guess part of my it's not a concern, it's just, I don't remember anything about the nonprofit discussion thing, and obviously I'll find out at the next work session, but it's just, kind of. And then you talked about that marijuana tax thing being wrapped up in that, so I don't totally understand where that one was coming from, but that's okay, you'll explain it later.
Yeah, it would have been probably really early or maybe even before you came on. It was tied to the budget discussions.
Okay.
And we had a request from a nonprofit who was wanting us to consider our use of the marijuana tax
I remember
funds
that, they came.
tied to the budget. And it's come to us a couple of times.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I know it was
Okay.
really
Yeah.
early.
Yeah, I remember the
There's no
second part of that
process or
conversation.
mechanism for us to do that, so
Yeah.
we have to.
Yeah, so when it came before us, we wanted to be fair because there's quite a number of nonprofits in Oregon City that would all love to have a
money.
shot at some
Money of some sort, yeah.
And so at that time, we had a discussion about the marijuana tax and funds and how those funds were being used by the agency, and I'm sure that will come up again.
Okay,
This
thank
time
you.
around for the budget.
Thank you for the tiny recap. That's,
Yeah, it's
So
been a
it's-
while.
yeah.
It's been a
It
while,
has.
yes.
That's okay. Somebody did mention it to me about a month ago, so.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're ready to move on to the discussion items. Number 2, so this is an update on Senate Bill 1573 and associated court decisions. Mr. Conkle or Ms. Turway, you gonna start off?
Thank you very much. This commission has discussed a few times the process for annexation in Senate Bill 1573, which allowed a different avenue for approval, which would not require voters of Oregon City. Our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter, has an update for you on how that court case has shooken out. So we wanted to follow up with you and just give you that update. And then at the end, I might just ask you for a little bit of policy advice. As you recall from our last meeting in November where we talked about this topic, the discussion was to discourage people from applying for annexations if they did not want to go to a vote of the people. And so we put up on our website that notice, and we've let people know sort of the position of the city commission, but it has not yet been tested. There's some sewer annexations in the fringes, but we'll see when the next actual annexation that's not sewer related comes up.
Okay, Ms. Richter.
Thank you. So I've provided you all a memo outlining the case, the decision. I can summarize it briefly, and then I'd like an opportunity to sort of respond to questions and have a discussion with you about the things that are of interest to you, if that's okay. As you know, Section 3 of the Oregon City Charter provides unless mandated by law, the city shall include all territory encompassed by its boundaries as they now exist or hereinafter are modified by the voters. And the Senate Bill 1573 passed in 2016 provides that in certain circumstances, where land is inside an urban growth boundary, where the city has a comprehensive plan policies governing its planning, where an annexation application is filed in those circumstances, where the city finds that its other ordinances are met, it has to approve the annexation and cannot send it to the voters. And so in 2017, the city of Corvallis and Philomath filed a challenge in Benton County Court arguing that Senate Bill 1573, that state law that prohibited asking the voters, was unconstitutional. The Benton County Court found that the Senate bill, that the legislation was constitutional, and the basis largely for the Benton County's decision was that the term unless mandated by law, that phrase, carves out an exception for things that the state wants to mandate a law for. So where there is no law, we'd ask the voters. Where there is a law, the law prevails. The language of the Oregon City Charter is very nearly identical to the charter language in Corvallis that the Benton County Court was asked to evaluate. Corvallis lost at the Benton County level. The League of Oregon Cities and Corvallis appealed that decision to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals evaluated the decision and in some agreed with the trial court that unless mandated by law provision is an express conveyance of any home rule authority to the state to make determinations on annexation. And there was an argument made that at the time that Corvallis adopted its charter language, it was interpreting the unless mandated by law to refer only to emergency sewer connections. There's provisions in the ORS that provide for automatic annexation in case of emergency. And so that clause was only intended to refer to that particular example and not to any laws enacted after the charter that the charter is adopted. In other words, it would apply to laws on the books already, but not future adopted laws. And that was an argument the league made. And the court said, no, the language is unless mandated by law. It doesn't say unless mandated by laws adopted at the time that this charter provision is implemented. It just says unless mandated by law, and that would include prescriptive, forward-looking, rather than as well as backward-looking laws that could carve away that authority. So, at the end of the day, the Court of Appeals agreed with the trial court. Court of Appeals said if a city doesn't like this, they may consider deleting the unless mandated by law provision, and that might be a way through. They didn't say they would find the city's home rule authority would trump state law. They said there are options, right? Which doesn't tell you one way or the other, but to say there are options. There are, as I understand it, 32 cities in Oregon that have voter-approved annexation provisions in their charter. 2 of them do not have that unless mandated by law provision, that clause in their charter. Those 2 cities are Molalla and Lake Oswego. I talked to the attorneys for both Molalla and Lake Oswego this morning, and Lake Oswego's provision requires voter annexation anytime the land is outside the urban growth boundary. So that wouldn't trigger the statute anyway, because the statute's only triggered when land is in the urban growth boundary. So if, for example, this Oregon city was considering annexing land that was outside the urban growth boundary, it would go to the voters because it wouldn't be subject to 1573. So that's not very helpful. Molalla city attorney, I'm going to share this with you, said that they're more interested in becoming part of the fire district than they are worried about voter annexation right now. So they haven't had any annexations. So they just haven't had any. I did also speak with the attorney for Corvallis and Willamette this morning about whether or not they were exploring the idea of removing the unless mandated by law clause, and Corvallis is not interested. Willamette has started to talking about it, but the response I got was the cost of litigation to test it will be more than Willamette is willing to take on. So I think if it were a collective effort, potentially that may be something, but my sense is that removing that clause is not a certain way to revive voter annexation in the face of this law. Certainly it would be challenged. Certainly, ORS 222, the annexation statutes are long and established with respect to the state setting provisions for annexations generally. And so there's some risk, and there would be some litigation in removing this clause and then sending a prospective annexation applicant to the voters and then waiting for them to take it to court to test it.
Is that the end of your summary?
That is the end of my summary right now. I'd be happy to get down in the weeds more if you'd like, or end it there.
No, I have a number of questions.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start simple. They referenced intramural versus extramural. What does that refer to?
The city's home rule authority extends to things within its boundaries, right? I mean,
Within the
of course,
city limit boundaries?
the city limit boundaries, that's what they refer to as intramural, things that the city controls. Of course, we couldn't use home rule authority to regulate something in the county. I mean, that wouldn't make sense, right? I mean, it's kind of seems axiomatic to me that the city's home rule authority extends to its boundaries. And extramural authority is activities outside of its boundaries, and the city does not have authority, and that's the area that the state regulates. And what the courts have said is annexation is an extramural activity. I mean, and I understand the argument that, you know, the city should get to decide where its boundaries are, and that is expressly the argument that the League of Oregon Cities made. And what the court said was, look, you've got this clause, unless mandated by law, you gave up any argument you have authority when you had this unless mandated by law clause.
The reason I asked for that distinction, because I was thinking, well, it's inside the urban growth boundary, but outside the city limits, so then they considered it extramural, so it was really slicing it pretty fine in my mind. Did you have a chance to review the Nacita letter?
I did.
And did you have a chance to look, because he referenced Mr. Kabizman's memo and significantly. Can you give us a summary of that? Does that argument hold merit? Is it an argument that could potentially prevail in the courts?
So what Corvallis did, and I'm not entirely sure when in the process Corvallis did this, but Corvallis, as far as I can tell, and Mr. Kabizman's memo bears this out, it indicates that Corvallis was one of the first jurisdictions to enact voter authorized annexation. And so what Corvallis did in the lawsuit was they interviewed and got affidavits from folks who were around at the time the charter was enacted. And those statements said things like, our intent at the time of enactment was only to include the emergency connection exception. That was our intent. And that's what those affidavits said. And the trial court struck those affidavits as not based on personal information, not reliable, a bunch of reasons that the court struck those affidavits. And on appeal, Corvallis asked the Court of Appeals to reconsider those affidavits. And what the Court of Appeals said is they aren't instructive. They aren't helpful because they are reflections in the present of what happened in the past. If you had voter, the language of the measure, and if you had the voter materials, that would be more appropriate evidence of what the intent of the voters were. And so I think the reason why Mr. Nacita included Mr. Kabizman's memo, and probably more importantly, is the commission report that had the resolution and the language of the ballot, was to show that this was more appropriate evidence. This is fundamentally different than the evidence that was taken in Corvallis. And although I agree with that, as far as it goes, if you look at the language of the ballot measure, it says this measure would not apply to certain annexations that the city is required to undertake, such as annexations to abate public health hazards pursuant to RS 222-900. It seems to me that's an example, such as annexations for public health hazards. And if you look at Mr. Kabizman's memo, we would add a provision accepting out those annexations mandated by state law. For example, health hazard annexations or annexations required to provide public services and facilities to super-sited uses. So I think Mr. Kibison was using that as an example, and I think if you look at the ballot measure, it kind of suggests it's an example of a state law, not that it is the only state law. So
It would have had to been worded differently then.
that's my take.
Yeah.
So I understand his point. There is some difference in the character of the evidence that he's offered is different than Corvallis. I'm not sure that it changes much in terms of the city is still, if the city denies an annexation based on this evidence or because they intend to amend their charter and remove the clause, you're still going to be in a litigation position. You know, I mean, this is helpful evidence, but it's not determinative, and you're still going to be in litigation to use home rule authority to trump state law in the face of a Court of Appeals opinion that says that state law is constitutional.
I also read it, and I thought the timing was a differentiation between what the court decided upon, as you just stated. And I also thought that the Kibison memo and the commission meeting at that time demonstrated the intent behind the law, which I think you always have to look at what is the intent behind the law. I'm also not a fan of pursuing legal expenditures that are probably forecast to be a loss. However, I also think I would be interested in having, and I appreciate your legal opinion, the League of Oregon Cities has a legal staff too, and I would be interested in sending them a question about what's their take on this, and also, does there seem to be any activity, as you said, a collective effort? And would we want to pursue that as part of a collective effort with shared cost? I believe the intent of the law is so important, which is why I've read the Federalist Papers relating to the Constitution. So
I should have mentioned 2 points on that. And I'm happy to reach out to Patty Mulhall, who's the general counsel for the League of Oregon Cities, and follow up. But I did speak with her as part of this memo. You should know that the League did not seek review by the Supreme Court of the Court of Appeals decision, which means I think that they decided to stop. I mean, they could have. I mean, 32 cities, there's a lot of cities that are affected by this. So I think that should give us some indication. I did ask her whether or not the League had prioritized revisiting or the law or scaling it back or changing it in any way to address the city's concerns, as it has been on a legislative priority for the League in the past. And she said it's not even in the top 10.
Not right now.
Right now.
yeah,
So I again, I'm happy to follow up with her and see if she would be, if she has heard any interest in helping to coordinate or oversee an effort at this. But my sense is that if so Moala's council is Beer, Yelsner, and Hammond. I don't know if you know them. They represent many, many jurisdictions in the metro area, and I reached out to their 6 attorneys, plus the Lake Oswego attorney, plus the Corvallis Willamette attorney. So I feel like I got a pretty, if somebody was out there pushing a charter amendment, I think they would be able to know that. And I think that, you know, if Willamette is exploring it, you know, it seems like it's sort of in the infancy right now.
are there not two possible approaches though? One is to submit, as we said, with our our actions at the time which demonstrate intent. That would be one approach. The other is to, that one makes me nervous about removal of the unless mandated by law clause, because in my history, when you did a drawing change to address, you've already admitted that you were not in a strong position to begin with. So, you know, I'd love to have a review by League of Oregon Cities and see if there's any collective interest, even if we took no action now. If there was a groundswell effort, we could join that at a later date, could we not?
Absolutely.
I mean, I'll defer, I monopolize this conversation because I'm such an advocate for home rule, and I always feel that the state continues to infringe upon home rule in many venues. So I'll sit silent for a moment and listen to comments from my co-commissioners.
Commissioner McGrath?
Yes, thank you. I feel much the same way that Commissioner O'Donnell does, is that home rule is pretty important as far as cities go, and particularly with Oregon City. And I guess part of the question, and maybe this is a little out there, but I think Oregon City's standing in terms of all the other cities is a little different because we were first.
Right.
So I don't know if that plays into this at all. You know, the state of Oregon didn't come into being until 1859. We were here in 1844, and I presume that our the laws that we had probably on the books at the time were probably fairly meager, I would suspect. And so our charter, was that done in the 80s? What is the date of our charter? So I guess part of it is that we have like super home rule, I guess if there's such a thing. And I guess I have always been either of the informed opinion or the uninformed opinion that that had some merit to it.
Yeah, my question along those lines is, when the charters were originally enacted, did they go to a higher body for approval versus it just being approved by the
Local jurisdiction.
Local
I would suspect
jurisdiction.
they were probably approved by each local jurisdiction.
But I'm not sure. Do you know?
I think they're approved by the voters and, you know.
To create a charter.
To create a charter. And, you know, the Home Rule Authority comes from the Oregon Constitution.
Right.
So it's hard for me to imagine that there's something greater than the Home Rule Authority beyond what the Constitution gives you, but I haven't put a lot of thought into it.
And again, you know, knowing when our Constitution was adopted and amended and adopted, you know, and amended, it's been many iterations down the road. I think in terms of the state, and, you know, I recognize that the state has some authority. Now, I'm not going to speak for counties because their legislation is way different than what cities have. Cities really are in the sweet spot. Counties came after, cities came first. And I guess it's another question for, you know, for the league. I know probably how they feel, but I guess I can project how they feel. In terms of cities' authorities and cities' destinies over their own boundaries, part of what I get concerned about is that you have communities all over the state, the cities, who are looking at themselves as autonomous organizations, which they are, that belong to a jurisdictional boundary, which is called our state, but that they really have a lot more authority than the state does. And so this is where we are bumping up against these two competing interests. And the state has certain rights and obligations, but in reality, I think the cities hold more sway than the state really does. And part of the big concern, as I have as Commissioner O'Donnell, is that little by little, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And we're not, you know, getting anywhere. And I think this case was an attempt to say, you know, we're drawing a line in the sand and stop it. And I don't know where, you know, the league is sitting with that at this point in time. Obviously, your note says here that, you know, with the pandemic and this and that and revenue shortfalls, you know, this is not this is not a high priority, but I think in terms of the level of long-term consequences, this is a problem. And I don't know how we address it. It's complicated. So when was our charter enacted?
The last one was voted on in 1982.
Okay, but we had
The
something
original.
before that.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go back and look.
I suspect it's old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because if you read what the League of Oregon Cities has about home rule, they will show you the multiple instances where the state has already proven that they are willing to trump home rule and enact legislation that
Against the best interest.
that requires cities to comply. I can't imagine that's gonna change anytime soon. I understand, I understand the fight, and I think at the end of the day, the city commission decides whether or not we join in another lawsuit. I don't know if we're willing to take the lead by ourselves and the legal cost for that without knowing if other cities would be interested in going in on that. Sometimes, I mean, truthfully, because this Senate Bill 1573 is talking about land specifically already within the urban growth boundary, I don't have as much heartburn over it because that's the whole purpose of the urban growth boundaries, is that land will be annexed over time and it is meant to be within the urban area. So I kind of feel like we're fighting a battle that's, you know, in 20 years' time is a moot point because the urban growth boundary development would probably, I mean, go to the boundary of the urban growth boundary. So, but I do support home rule. I just don't want to, I wouldn't want to do the legal battle all by ourselves. And if there is an interest by others, because I do feel like it's a losing battle. I think it's a legal battle that we're going to lose, but it's one that we could go in on. Commissioner Smith?
I believe that there was a lot of people in this city that thought we should have joined on this lawsuit to begin with.
There were.
And I'm one of them, and I think that therefore, we've saved some money by not fighting that battle. Clearly they're towards the end of that fight, and maybe there wouldn't be any sort of a resurgent or effort by other cities to fight it unless we stepped up and said, this is our time to fight it. So I do feel like we kind of let them on their own, and now to say, well, if you guys want to help fight this fight, we'll fight it. Well, we kind of let them do it on their own for us. And maybe it's our time to step up. And maybe that would generate some more interest in it. Clearly, there's a lot of other priorities right now, and so this hasn't taken a forefront. But if there was another way of looking at it, or if we felt like we had some separate argument that would add to that cause, then maybe that's something that we should do.
My question, though, is if we were to take this up again, are we taking it up only for Oregon City and asking the court to look at it only for the Oregon City, and we don't want any other cities involved because we have factual information about the intent? And, you know, if the city of Corvallis has already tried that with some documentation that they felt like was trying to prove the original intent, and we have a different set of materials that maybe we feel like is pretty strong. If we group in with other cities, regardless of knowing the quality of their materials, how does that affect our legal standing? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I mean, my take on it is that I wouldn't seek a declaratory judgment from a Clackamas County court based solely on our materials with the unless mandated by law clause there. I think that the court was pretty clear that that is a cessation of rights to the state, and that there are no limits on that. And I appreciate that we may have some different evidence, but that to me would be a very difficult hill to climb. I would say amend the charter, remove the clause, and then you sit in a completely different factual circumstance. And I mean, sure, keep this evidence in, to show, this was what the voters intended this clause to mean. The Court of Appeals seemed to say that's not what the clause meant, so we're ditching the clause, because we did mean it to mean health exemption. Or we make the clause say, unless mandated by the health hazard exemption, comma, voters will approve. So let's distinguish ourselves. Let's work with Philomath and any other jurisdiction that has expressed interest in doing that. And then we take the court battle however it comes. Either it comes as a result of refusing an annexation because it goes to because we won't approve it, we won't finalize it without it going to the voters, and then a developer or applicant files suit against the city, or we challenge the law. Either way, I mean, however that takes place, I think that's how, that makes more sense to me from a strong, it just, I think, puts us in a stronger position.
Gotcha. Commissioner O'Donnell?
If we were to join with other cities and we essentially took a multifaceted approach to it, say we left ours with our explanation that occurred at the time between Mr. Kabizman's memo and the city commission, and that was our approach, and then another city took the approach. Have any of them been decided with cities that did not have that unless mandated by law clause in there?
No, there have been no, like I said, there are 32 cities that have voter approval, 2 that don't have the unless mandated by law, and neither of them have had any annexations that resulted in this conflict.
And they were not parties to the suit?
They were not parties to the suit.
So, I mean, there's 2 approaches right there, and then the third approach would be defining further what a city meant by unless mandated by law, as you previously said. So if that went before a court, they could make distinctions. They could decide none of those worked, or one of the 3 or 2 of the 3 were acceptable. They wouldn't rule in toto. They would just look at each situation and rule individually, would they not?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the case comes up. I mean, if we go with the declaratory judgment, like Corvallis did, then Corvallis can present their charter language, Philomath presents their charter language down the line. If we refuse an annexation that complies with 1573 because we want to send it to the voters, the only city is going to get sued is Oregon City.
Right.
So, and does Philomath come in to help out because they know that this is their chance to get another shot at the Court of Appeals? Perhaps. But there's too many variables really to say how it would necessarily shape out. The other thing I should add to this discussion is that amending the charter is not the only way you might get to some of this stuff. You might consider, as part of your comprehensive plan rewrite, to change the annexation factors. You're not gonna say ask the voters as part of an annexation factor, but you might be able to drill down on some of the issues that are of concern to voters in a way that's more concrete, that is a way that gets at their concerns in a way that, there's other ways to look at the annexation factors, criteria, in order to comply with 1573, the city has to find that the proposal is consistent with all of the codes and regulations. So you could change the codes and regulations potentially. I mean, you're not going to get voter approval in the way that you're thinking about it now, but there may be some other ways to look at it.
And I've often thought of that in terms of the critical services criteria.
Yeah.
Honestly, it just seems like we move forward and say we will catch the critical services up, and I struggle with that.
I do too.
I'd like to pursue multiple avenues of thought on it as to how we can move forward. I'd like to also run it by the League of Oregon Cities and see, and keep, like, be on a watch list. Who would care to join with us? I don't necessarily want to go alone, but as Commissioner Smith said, maybe it's our time, and I don't like spending money in what's probably projected to be a losing effort. But God, I love the concept of home rule so much, and I see these other, where the state also intercedes, and it just troubles me. I get a thing about powers reserved to the cities versus the state and vice versa. So I don't know if there's a way to monitor this, and maybe that sounds vague, but I'm a defender of home rule. I would like to take every opportunity to preserve it. In the meantime, I would make decisions on annexation on this critical services piece, which troubles me greatly.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, so I wanted to get back to the chicken and egg comment that I made earlier. So I know that the Legislative Assembly historically has given powers to the cities. And they did this in the late 1800s. So again, I go back to, we were already here.
Right.
Did the state then give our powers to us retroactively, even though we already had those powers because of our incorporation date? And so it seems to me there's again, as I said, I'm being a little facetious, but there's a chicken and the egg thing going on here. Because if you read the home rule provisions in the state, we give the cities an authority to do X, Y, and Z, and you can have these powers. And that's as of a certain date. Well, again, we were already here. We were already doing our own thing, whatever that thing was. So the relationship, again, I have to carve us out just a little bit and say our relationship with this is quite a bit different than most of the other cities. But I mean, I'm still agreeing with you that yes, if there is some interest that we should be looking at that. So there's that whole issue of the home rule doctrine, when it was enacted, when we were here, when these things were given. I'm not sure how the state could give us something that we already had, is kind of the question I'm kind of asking. And I know this is getting into historical semantics, but it really is kind of important in terms of what we're trying to look at and how it affects us as a jurisdiction. And I would say that, for any jurisdiction that became a city before 1859, they would be similarly in the same boat. Because, again, they got their authority from probably the federal government at the time. And I haven't read the Dillon Rule in like a million years because we read it in planning school, but vague parts of it are coming back to me about what he said in terms of, this is where you get your authority. So it just opens up a whole big nest to me in terms of where we are historically, whereas the legislation and the enactment by the legislature saying, oh, cities, you can do this. I can see it applying to Kaiser. Yeah, that's a new city. Yeah, they come under all that. You got City of Adams. You got, City of Portland, 1850. So they were here first too. So before the state. And I don't know what powers I haven't delved into the provisional to the territorial legislature, but it had to basically create the framework. That was basically their role. When they got here, and the federal government had to approve, quote unquote, that constitution that we had.
I think that's valid. I think our standing is somewhat different than others
It's just,
based on the timeline. I agree with you.
A little bit different.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any actions for us tonight. Are you looking for direction, Ms. Turway? I think you were wondering some policy questions.
I just want to clarify on the website from the direction from the City Commission at the November 20th, 2019 meeting, we have been telling people and posting on our website that if you apply for an annexation other than emergency sewer annexation, we will deny your annexation if you don't go to a vote of the people. Is it okay if we remove that from the website? If you want to add a sentence encouraging people to go to a vote of the people, we can do something like that. Is there a large policy statement that the City Commission is making now in advance of any tests, or can I just remove everything? How would you like me to handle questions from applicants as they come?
That would have been nice to have been forewarned about that discussion to give it some thought ahead of time,
I need to think about it.
as do I.
Okay.
I think it's status quo for the time being, till we can ponder that a little bit more.
So I can remove the sentence saying you'll deny annexations that don't go to a vote of the people.
I don't think that's what we
Just leave it as is?
Leave it.
Okay,
Just leave it as it stands right now.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure if there's a developer who wants to push it, they'll let you know
And
Yeah.
that we're not being in compliant. And have to
they'll come
deal
and
with
tell
it.
us about it, and we'll hear the, you know, I'm willing to listen to the viewpoints. You know, that's part of what we signed up for. I don't want to preclude anybody from saying that we're automatically going to do, you know, we have a staff that's our firewall at this point in time, and they can come through the firewall and ask the question.
All right, I think you have direction on that
Okay,
one
so
item. Lots of uncertainty still.
are we being asked to do anything at this point other than monitor the situation?
Being asked to
League.
contact the League of Oregon Cities, be on a watch list, that if other cities intend to pursue this further, maybe have a discussion with them about which avenue. We've discussed at least 3 possible avenues that could be moved forward on that may vary by city and take special recognition of the timeline within which we were here and you weren't, and we established these laws. You know, maybe a discussion, does that give us any standing?
Oh, and then finding out when we adopted the charter originally.
1892?
1895.
1895, okay.
Okay, and then you'd like that brought back to this commission in a work session?
Of an update based on
Yeah, an
what Ms.
update.
Richter finds, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yes, because this issue isn't going away. I mean, right now, technically, we're not in compliance with the law with the statement on the website, so, you know, we're knowingly walking into litigation waters. So we just have to decide how far we want to wade.
Let's wait for a while.
We're going to wade for a little
Can we
bit.
get some floaties? Just for a little bit?
All right, I think we have direction.
We do. Good.
Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, that was a good
think-
summary.
I think the other thing that is, you know, people come talk to you, I think what we're saying is it's not a black and white issue, that there's some shades of gray, and it really requires some thought. And I would hope there would be some recognition that, yes, we want to do everything we possibly can to do the right thing. But when push comes to shove, we have to make a decision about what's right for this particular community. And, you know, we understand that we have the almighty state breathing down our necks, but hopefully they would be respectful as well to give us some time to be thinking about this and not come down and tell us, like, shake their finger at us.
I also remember that when this bill passed, the vote was 32 to 28.
Yep, very close.
Yeah.
There is some heavy-duty lobbying going on, I can
Yep.
tell you that.
Okay, so we're going to move on. Thank you, Ms. Richter. Ms.
Thank you.
Turway? Item number 3 is legal expense summary and breakdown. Mr. Conkle?
Thank you, Madam President, Commission President, and Commissioners. Good evening. So the city.
He was struggling for that, that's okay.
Start over.
Madam, whatever you want,
Whatever.
Commission President.
whoever's up there.
And Commissioners, good evening. So the Commission requested a work session to talk about the legal expenses for the city and to discuss whether to consider having an attorney as an employee of the city versus the current practice of contracting the city's legal services out. So in the information that we put together, I have Mr. Foyles here, as well as Ms. Wilkie and Mr. Brady Hoft on the line, if there are any questions about, you know, how we did the accounting. So I think the first thing is, what we tried to do was provide kind of a general, we tried to put them into what we typically see as the buckets that those legal expenses would generally fall within. General matters, which are generally city general government legal expenses. So, attending the city commission meetings, answering questions as it relates to interpretation of the charter, election issues, general city matters that we see coming in the door. Then we broke it out into litigation, land use board of appeals, those type of litigation. So the planning commission or staff makes a decision, it gets appealed to the city commission makes a decision, that decision gets appealed to land use board of appeals. We, through litigation, then defend the commission's decision there and their position. In some cases, it ends at the Land Use Board of Appeals. From Land Use Board of Appeals, sometimes they go to the Court of Appeals. After the Court of Appeals, it potentially goes to the Supreme Court. What we've done on some of those over the last couple of years is really transitioned from, if it's an administrative action that was taken that's being appealed, the noticing was, deficient, or, the commission interpreted a code a certain way. We tend to take the lead on that because that have a direct impact on us as the city. Other issues that tend to be more the responsibility of the applicant who brought the application if they're being appealed. So if the appellant is a neighborhood association, we tend to push the applicant to take the lead on writing the legal brief and defending their application. So we draw that little bit of a distinction between what's really important to us as the city because we're making an administrative decision or an interpretation of our code that we feel necessary to defend because of a position or a finding that the commission made, versus other instances where it's really up to the applicant to defend their application through that process. So what that has done, though, is that while we still have those litigation fees associated with those, especially land use applications, we have started to see quite a shift of how much we spend defending those, because we've essentially become like the second chair, unless it's an issue for us. But we still do have work as the litigation is usually a combination of the city attorney or the assistant city attorney and a litigation attorney or attorney with subject matter experience. The human resources consultant attorney specializing in employment law, collective bargaining, and human resources. This tends to be a specialty type of attorney that's brought to the table. Pretty much every jurisdiction in the metro region, whether they have a consultant attorney for the city attorney legal expenses or an in-house attorney, they tend to have a line item almost 100% for human resources related issues. So you're talking BOLI or workman's comp issues, those type of specialized employment law that we deal with on a daily basis. Other special projects. So here for us, you really see two condemnation proceedings. So that's a special type of attorney focusing on, rights of way acquisition through the condemnation process. Usually we're trying to negotiate that so that we don't get into a condemnation situation, but that condemnation attorney makes sure that we walk through that entire process complying with all the requirements of state law. Because essentially, from when you start that process, when we come and request a resolution authorizing the ability to do condemnation, if that negotiation does not go and we're not able to come to an agreement through negotiation, you do end up in court. So essentially from when we start that process, we are, unfortunately protecting the city through putting together the record, following all the requirements to ensure that if we do get into court, we're going to be successful in that process. And then the other one that's pretty specific there is telecommunications and rights of ways. A couple years ago, gosh, what's it been? You might have been on the commission when we put the right-of-way fee in. So that probably would have been 7-8 years ago. A lot of legislation comes out of the federal government related to telecommunications and what you can do within your rights of ways. And so this is always this push and pull with the providers that we have in our rights of way, what those standards can be, what those fees can be. You just recently saw it with small cell as it relates to the rights of way. So, the attorneys that we have here, that's all that they do, is dealing with keeping up with federal regulations, state regulations, what's available to local regulation, local level, and helping us make sure that we have our codes in place and our fees in place to be able to adequately recuperate the expenses of upkeep within our rights of ways. And then urban renewal, I just added that. It was difficult in looking at some of the comparator jurisdictions to know whether their urban renewal was in the total attorney number that they gave us for city expenses. I tend to think of them, since they are two separate entities. So, in the numbers that I gave you an overall of city and urban renewal, but then I did subtract out the urban renewal to try to give you a sense of what the general city legal expenses typically are. We also looked at comparable cities in terms of what you see on a pay scale for, whether it's a city attorney, assistant city attorney, paralegal, or an assistant. So in this scenario, we just put together a city attorney and an administrative assistant. I think that, it would be hard to have just a city attorney. We have very minimal administrative assistants in the city of Oregon City. I think that you need some type of a combination personally if we were to bring this in-house. So then you're looking at approximately $325,000 for those two positions when you do salary plus benefits on both of them. And then, I would argue that you still want that speciality representation. And, what we saw, especially 2 years ago on the litigation front, there was litigation down at Clackamas and down in circuit court where I believe we had the attorney down there all day for 2 weeks, and that's all that they did. So when you think about one attorney, you're going to have to invest in other support services between city commission meetings, city commission work session, planning commission meetings, planning commission work sessions, just that alone. And then dealing with all the land use issues that come in, that are reviewed, that, are either staff decisions or going to the planning commission or coming to the city commission. I really do think that you're going to end up in a situation where one person cannot do it all, in that situation. And I don't know that you want that either. There is a benefit to that expertise in how successful we are in implementing and defending the positions that we've taken as a city. So the 2019-20 total City of Oregon City legal expenses was just over $358,000, taking out the urban renewal component of it. Under the current contracting method, we utilize for city services. The city has access to over 9 attorneys that have different specialities with the firms that we have contracts with, providing us a range of services, access to expertise, and timeliness in response to what comes in here on a daily basis. I think in looking at it, when I look at that, yes, there's some up and down in there, but really that litigation cost is a big driver in those categories that we put together. The others, land use tends to go up and down a little bit just depending on what type of development we're seeing. Every 3 years, labor is going to go up because we have both contracts open typically for both police and ASME, so you see that increase. Every once in a while we get a one-off in terms of some type of an employment claim that, potentially goes through the process and isn't dealt with earlier. But generally speaking, those are pretty close. It's really that litigation one that really tends to drive, just because it's not typical that we initiate the litigation. We're usually in a responding situation to a position that the commission has taken. So I'm not sure, I've talked quite a bit, so I'll go ahead and stop and answer any questions that the commission may have.
Well, as always, I have a lot of thoughts about it.
I was actually astonished that we immediately jumped to a $630,000 legal department consisting of 4 people, and I'm not sure you summarized that just now, because you have an attorney, an assistant, a deputy attorney, a legal assistant, and an administrative assistant, and
No, I wasn't proposing that. I was just saying what the options are that we see.
Oh, okay.
I was,
All right.
I gave you a number for a city attorney and an admin.
And other than that, the urban renewal piece, I was looking at the progression as it goes down, and I believe that I would trust that 2019, 2020 piece is 3/4, not 4 quarters, because we're not done, right? So you're through September.
No, that's we're on a July. We're on a July
we're on
1 to
July.
June 30th.
Okay, so
Yep.
that is
that's
in
a booked
total.
number.
So why does that number say so high? Are we still in litigation over urban renewal? To the
Yes.
tune of 68,000?
Yep. So we had both the Williams litigation against the urban renewal district, as
Yeah.
well as we had the Cove.
Yeah.
We had a lot of attorney fee time in putting together that EDA.
Understood.
Yep.
So nobody here takes argument with the need for specialized knowledge. I can't see why we would. We understand the need for labor attorneys. We understand the need for specialized knowledge of any kind. And as a manager, I look at the big hitters, and the big hitters are commission meetings and planning commission. Those are our big expenditures. And, I think the discussion is, how do we control costs? We're trying to be frugal in that, but not at the expense of incurring expenses that we would because we didn't have proper legal advice either. This is a wonderful account for Bateman Seidel, and we wanted to explore the possibility, and there's also benefit to familiarity, our legal team's familiarity with ourselves. So we're trying to be good stewards of the public money and wanted to explore other options. There's another part to the conversation which has to do with reporting structure, but that's not tonight. This is about finances, and we can revisit that reporting structure piece again, and I won't go any further into that tonight. I guess I can't take issue with it other than try to be good stewards of the money. This is a commission that's focused on trying to avoid litigation unless it's necessary. We won't shirk from it if it becomes necessary, but we're not inviting it either with our actions. So we hope that we can report over the coming year, assuming all of us will still be here, over the coming year that we continue to drive those numbers down. And we ask your help to make good decisions and drive those numbers down, but not, again, at the expense of more punitive exposure because we didn't have good legal advice.
Yeah, and I think that's the balancing act.
Yes, it is.
I think, and Commissioner McGriff can probably attest to this. Just the land use world, how complex and litigious it has become. And the way it works is they'll raise it or waive it, right? So if it's a staff decision, type 2 decision, you need to raise the issue and respond to it. Otherwise, you've waived it, right? So what happens is a lot of that work gets front-loaded so that the local decision maker on appeal has all the information to make a fair and legit decision based on the record that's been put together. But what that means is a lot of that legal work gets front-loaded on a maybe or maybe not appeal, right? And so the last thing you want is to just kind of push something through and not make the arguments that were either made by staff or the planning commission or the city commission when they were doing their deliberations and reaching their decision. You have to capture those because that's the only opportunity to do so. But we do understand that, and I think one of those was putting the appeal first chair onto the applicant. This is your application. You go defend it. The commission, there was nothing controversial in the commission's decision here. There's a disagreement about a standard or an interpretation. So you see that. I think that we try to use the legal services available to us sparingly and have really tried to get into a situation where, you know, like on land use, a lot of the criteria are pretty standard, you know? You've got an 8-inch water line, you got a 10-inch sanitary sewer line, it's made from this material, and it extends from here to here, right? So trying to, boilerplate's not the right word, but trying to standardize that as much as we can to reduce some of the review costs that has to go into that.
So Tony, who makes the decision to engage legal services? Is it by department or through you or always with your blessing?
Not always, it depends on what it is. You know, land use, rely on Ms. Turway. You know, she's with her staff involved with the Historic Review Board. You know, she knows the applications that are coming in. You know, sometimes you just know, right? Other times you know it's going to be no big deal, right? It's a pretty simple application, pretty straightforward, not too worried about it. Other times you know it's going to be an issue, or you know that there's, you know, strong arguments being made on both sides, right? So typically, I rely on the department heads to manage that. There are occasions when they'll come to me and it's like, okay, we need to get the attorney involved. You know, this is an interpretation of, you know, contract law, bylaws, procedures, you know, and, you know, between Bill and Carrie, quite honestly, I think you've got over 35 years of experience with this city and that institutional knowledge, which you actually saw tonight with some of the memos that were written, you know, so that there's that continuity of decision-making in previous positions that were taken, which is, you know, helpful, being able to remember back, you know, why we did something or why we interpreted something a certain way. You know, labor.
Certainly, yeah.
You know, certainly rely, you know, we have Kathy Peck here to help and Deanne. You know, they actually bring a third attorney with them as well who deals with some of the arbitration work. You know, so there's just that breadth of experience. And, you know, for Bateman Seidel, it's the same way. You've got 3-4 attorneys in that office with specialization that we're able to tap into. So this isn't just Bill and Carrie. You know, they've got other attorneys there that we utilize for contracting, real estate negotiation, those type of things.
So I'm trying to counsel.
So I don't know that I ever answered your question.
No,
on how
you
we
did.
control.
And I'm
Yeah.
trying to, you know that I'm still smarting from not having known that I could have deferred annexations pending the court decision. And I'm trying to, I want the commission to have access to legal advice, but I don't want to run amok where commissioners are randomly calling legal advice and you get these bills at the end of the month and it's because O'Donnell asked the guy 6 hours worth of questions, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, how do we not get those kind of surprises? How does the commission become aware of those legal discussions without asking for direct contact with lawyers? And I don't want to drive our costs up, but that one will always stick in my craw, and obviously it does.
I think
We want to be made aware of all possible options and not have them filtered.
right. And I think that's, you know, that was made crystal clear to me last January.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that I hope that you're starting to see that in the reports that are bringing forward. You know, what I always struggled with that statement was I don't know what all of them are, right? So I think what we've been trying to do is be more thoughtful in providing the options that we think you can legally defend, you know, and so I think that's where, you know, I think it's pressing staff and the attorney to say, okay, you know,
Is there more?
is there, yeah, you know, and we may give you 4 and there may be 10, right? I mean, that's the difficulty, is that I think we need to be upfront about the options that we see and then engage in a conversation to have an understanding of, you know, if there is a different route that you want to take. So I think it's twofold, honestly. And I think hopefully you're starting to see that a little bit in terms of, you know, not here's recommendation number 1, we think you should do it. Here's 2 recommendations, 3 recommendations, 4 recommendations, walking that line of, especially with the attorney, you know, what, I can bring you a lot of options. You know, I would prefer that they're legal and that they're defendable. Right. And I think you would as well. I'd hate to give you direction that we then go drop $150,000 going up to the Supreme Court and lose.
Yeah.
That's the hard one.
I mean, at the end of the day, they can present us options And if we don't like the options presented, it's still on us to continue the conversation and say, well, I don't like any of your options. And so with the issue that you're talking about, because I think that happened before I was on the commission, I'm trying to, what I don't know in that instance was it that they didn't present an option, or was it that maybe they made a mistake and told the commission something that wasn't in fact true, that we learned later, so there's a difference between evaluating options, and I don't want to put it all on the attorneys. If they present us options and we're not happy with them,
That wasn't the case. If someone would have sat here and said, one option you can pursue is defer annexations until such time as this case moves through the court system. Had I heard that, I would have acted upon
A
it.
bunch of grief.
yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want to get hung up on that. I mean, we're all trying to do better. Things happen. But, as a manager, I focus on the big line items, and they jump at you. I mean, 2 of them are 50% of our costs, more than 50% of our costs.
Which,
But you cannot not afford to have legal representation present at commission meetings and planning commission.
I wouldn't recommend it.
I would not recommend it either. I think that was a good decision on your part.
Let's call it.
So I have a couple of questions. So in your comparisons, where you're calling out human resources on all of these, including with ours as a separate line item.
Yep.
Is that indicating that all of the other cities also use a different attorney, or they contract out human resources?
In my understanding, I know Patrick put these numbers together, but my understanding is that yes, they contract out, and it is actually a separate line item within their adopted budgets, because that's what we went back to, was their budget documents to
Right.
try to get this information. I don't know if there's anything
And
else.
when would we engage an HR attorney?
I'm sorry?
When would we engage an HR attorney?
I definitely look for support in a few different areas. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Yes, and you have to take off your thing there.
So definitely I would engage support in labor relations in general, if there's some sort of grievance, some difficult disciplinary procedures. Obviously, ADA, FEMLA, OFLA, there can be some really difficult scenarios that I will reach out and get support there. They do support me through the bargaining process, obviously, and also policies every once in a while when there's some questions about best practices or the way other people are doing it, so.
Tell us what
Investigations.
OFLA is again.
OFLA, Oregon Family Medical Leave
Leave
Act.
Act, okay, that's what I was remembering.
It's the Oregon version of FEMLA,
Yeah.
So in your assessment of the comparable cities, I find it really interesting to compare the number of FTE versus the amount of staff. And so we've kind of followed the same model. Granted, ours is contract services, but I'm looking at Carrie Richter's nameplate, and it says Assistant City Attorney, and I assume Bill Kabizman is the city attorney. So we've essentially named those in some formal recognition that those are the positions, and we currently are following that structure. So it would lead me to believe that we would, if we were to hire these positions, we would probably need a city attorney, a deputy, or assistant city attorney.
And I agree, that's one way to look at it, is cost versus FTE. I think another way to look at it is cost versus development activity within a jurisdiction. So when you think about some of these jurisdictions, they tend to not have significant growth areas left, urban growth boundary expansion areas left, or actively engaging in those. What's interesting is you look at a jurisdiction like West Lynn, and, rapidly growing, a lot of housing going on. I categorize Oregon City kind of in that grouping with like Happy Valley. We tend to have the most land available relative to some of those landlocked ones. And so I think what
you know, you tend to see those development issues tend to drive a lot of your costs around legal representation from a land use perspective.
Right. I mean, when you look at City of Wilsonville, they have less FTE, but man, they've got hefty legal bills, but they're also in an area that has a lot of growth.
It's exploding.
It's exploding.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's one like statistic that's, that just says
One
this
silver
drives it,
bullet.
right? But we are a full service city. You know, when you think about it, we don't contract out to the county. We don't contract out our engineering review, our planning. You know, we take all that on internally, which means we also take on those legal expenses to do it right and then defend it.
Yeah, so I guess I'll wrap up my comments with one of the benefits of using like Bateman and Seidel, a team of attorneys that I know that they are also attorneys for other cities. And therefore, they are seeing a lot of the same issues. They can bring knowledge of what's happening in other cities to bear in mind. And there's a lot to be said for that, of having that background and supportive information that we benefit from. I think one of the concerns that we've heard from the public, or maybe concern / recommendation, was that the city attorney should report to the city commission versus reporting to the city manager. And that's come up multiple times in the 2 years that I've, short time that I've been on the city commission. And so I'm wondering, when I look at these comparable cities, it doesn't tell me, but it makes me believe that all of these cities have the attorney staff, I presume, reporting to the city manager. Is that true?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a mix.
True.
It's a
It's a mix.
It's a mix, yes.
So there are some instances
yes.
where the attorney staff and the attorney unit as a whole maybe reports to the, or how does that
Do you know
work?
the specific, is it just the city attorney or the whole staff?
I believe West Lynn is to the entire commission or
Well, but
council.
is it all of the attorney staff? Like
Or
the
just the
city
city
attorney,
attorney?
the assistant city attorney,
Right.
the admin, right? I think
Right.
that was the
Right,
question.
yes.
So Lake Oswego, Tigard, Westland, most of them are essentially a charter officer similar to the city manager. And that the staff report directly to the city attorney. The way I've seen it. Is that what you mean?
So, yeah, so Lake Oswego has 4 FTE.
Four
Those
FTE.
4 FTE report to
The city attorney.
But only the city attorney is responsible to the commission.
Yeah,
So it'd probably be like similar to my
Right.
position, right?
Right.
yeah.
So I guess that's one piece that we haven't talked about that I know has come up. And I think it was maybe part of the consideration of why we wanted to look at it as well. There's been some complaints or, like, is that a change in structure that is necessary or warranted?
Yeah, it begs 2 questions. It begs the quality of information that everybody shares, but it also begs what's the incurred cost versus our current way of doing it.
Right. Commissioner Smith?
So this is my 3rd term on the city commission, and this is the 3rd time I remember having this conversation. And I wish I could remember all the details of why we made decisions in the past on this. This discussion tonight in terms of the money brings a lot of that back up again. Because, I think my first term on the commission, this question came up. Second term on the commission, it came up. And I vaguely remember all of this conversation. And I think that partly because of all the, clearly there's so many different elements underneath the attorney throughout the entire city that the city manager is really the one who understands all of those, and the rest of the staff that this affects answers to the city manager. And I think that is probably why we've kind of always settled back on that, in the sense that it makes more sense in that realm. Clearly, it has come up as an issue in the past when we had issues with our city manager in the past, where we were questioning how the attorney was being used by individual city managers. And I think that's why that question comes up continually. But, you know, in general sense, I would say if the city commission has an issue where they feel that the attorney is not being directed in the right way, then the job issue is not with the attorney, it's with the city manager.
Right.
In which case can be replaced by the commission. So I think that's why that has never really been changed in that realm, because there's an avenue to deal with it.
Right.
Beyond that, you know, if the city manager works for the commission and is, you know, clearly directing the will of the commission, then it shouldn't be an issue. And I think that's partly why we've tried to deal with the concerns of that one little small piece about, you know, if the city manager was directing the city attorney based on their own vested interest or some reason for protecting themselves, that are those issues addressed. And I think that's why we've got a different process in terms of evaluating the city manager and all the other infrastructure that we've put in place through HR and stuff like that. So, you know, in looking back on some of the past conversations, I still feel fairly comfortable with that. But again, it's not that it won't come up again, because anytime the general public has that question, well, why does he answer to you, or why does this person answer to this person? Unless they understand the full picture, I don't know that they would really understand why that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess I would follow on to that. I agree with you. And part of my reason for bringing it up is because as soon as I don't bring it up, we're going to hear from some folks who watch these meetings are going to say, I've mentioned this before and you guys didn't even consider it. And so I want to make sure that we're addressing that. But the other point, just for transparency and for this conversation for people who are watching this, I agree with you, because I feel pretty strongly that the city manager comes to us, and when we're in executive session talking about legal items, we are absolutely making the decisions as the city commission and providing the direction as to what we want to do with litigation. This is there's you know, maybe in the day-to-day operations of kind of little things, but when we're, you know, if it's a case where it's a big item where we're spending a lot of money on litigation, that has absolutely come before the city commission, and we have reviewed those things with our attorney, and in those situations, I know for a fact the city manager is not acting on his own, and the city commission is certainly providing direction on whether or not we want to continue with litigation, whether or not we want to stop it, whether or not, you know, what decisions we want to make. So just, you know, folks should know that I agree with Commissioner Smith. I think we have a process in place that is working pretty well. And I think we have a very open relationship and communication pathway with the city manager. And if there's something happening that we don't like, that we'll address it with the city manager. But Commissioner O'Donnell?
And also, I'll say this from a financial perspective, the contract employee avoids the benefit package. And if you look at the increase in cost due to the benefit package between 53 to 70%, do you want to spend that? And realizing that the billable hours from Bateman Seidel are at $250, and maybe an in-house we'd be paying $130 or something. But regardless, there's a lot of benefit package hours, dollars in there that we can either use them for legal advice or. So that being said, maybe we ought to look at everybody being contract. That was teasing.
I was also
Because there's a certain loyalty piece there that's important.
Yeah, and I think, you know, and the other thing that I left off of that, I realized after I sent you the staff report, was that, you know, yes, you know, when we talked about the hourly rate, you know, but that's, you know, office space, that's their administrative help that helps us, you know, that's their legal, paralegal, that's their assistant helping with meetings. So I mean, there are other benefits
Definitely.
embedded in that hourly rate that's a benefit to the city in terms of addressing issues and keeping things moving. I don't know if you want me to talk at all about
No, I think,
I think you guys are.
not to interrupt, I'm satisfied with the summary. I think it was good management to look at it. I personally am satisfied with that stated and per the discussion to just continue on as we are.
Commissioner McGriff, you have comments?
Yeah, I want to say that, and again, I'm going to have a little longer memory than you, Mr. Commissioner Smith, is that I believe that we, as a city, made the change to contracting at the retirement of our city attorney. I believe it's either John Akins or John Aker. I'm trying to remember his last name. I can see his face in front of me. And that would have been in the 80s. Is that, based on your research, is that correct? I'm looking at Tony.
So I was 6, I'm not,
You were 4? So anyway,
I don't remember,
Yeah, well, you weren't here anyway. So we had an in-house attorney, and I am trying to remember whether there was, I think there might have been a legal, but John preceded me. I mean, I only knew John after the fact. He was not our attorney at the time was contract. We were with Preston, Gates and Ellis, if I can remember the iteration of Bateman, Seidel. It's a lot of changes there. And we had Ed Sullivan for many, many years with the rotating cast of assistant city attorneys who are gone on to bigger and better things. My opinion is that I've seen it work both ways. I'm personally comfortable with it both ways. I think there is something to the factor of having your own in-house counsel, and that person's one and only obligation is to the jurisdiction that they work for. And I don't have any problem with giving somebody a benefit package because I think that's part of the package. But I think, getting back to one point that Commissioner O'Donnell said that is something that I'm very concerned about is I'm, as you know from our sessions, I'm very interested in driving those numbers down. Very interested in reducing the number of cases that we have because I think they can either be negotiated or dismissed or we can work out some sort of settlement. And I would like to see that list honed down to, 5 at some point in time. I mean, I'm not saying which 5, but I'm just saying I think that we have a lot of opportunity to reduce the cases that we have if we can do it. And we have been doing that. We've been trying to do it. I'd like to see us put a little more emphasis on doing that to help reduce those numbers. I don't enjoy going to court for things. I don't enjoy us having to be in litigation. And I like the fact that we are not, where we need to stand up and be counted, I have no problem with that because sometimes we have to do that. That's just the way it is. Oregon City shouldn't get pushed around by anybody. And I want to make sure that we don't. But I think that there are opportunities for reconciliation. I think there are opportunities for additional communication. And sometimes I understand that just is not going to be able to happen because the other party is not interested in coming to the table. But as long as I know that we have done everything that we could to try to resolve it, I'm satisfied that if it continues, but I know we've made the effort and I just want to encourage us to continue to make the effort. And we all know, Rocky more so than others. I remember John Buell coming into the office, and he was a former city recorder, and he was kind of a jack of all trades and was South Fork Water Board manager at one time. I mean, he did kind of a lot of things, and he was kind of a legend here in the community. He was kind of like a John Buell. Oh, actually, Wyatt Parno is kind of the John Buell of that era. So he had a lot of different roles in the city, and he was in all the time when I was working. But so again, just that's really kind of where I'm at right now in terms of driving those numbers down. And if we have another discussion about reporting structure, I'm very willing to listen to my fellow commissioners and what their concerns are and what their opportunities and constraints are. So we have a lot of options to look at this.
The one thing I just wanted to clarify too, is that, we have an insurance provider, city, county insurance, right? So, in these numbers that I've provided you, we pay them a policy once a year, right? And so if we get a tort claim for damages, CIS typically takes that. So, when you think about, if we didn't have, certain tort claims brought against the city, these numbers would be a lot less. Those are dealt with by CIS through our policy, since they're the ones who would pay out, should we lose that, or they're the ones who negotiate that. So I just wanted to clarify that.
There is one more avenue that we have. So we pay an annual membership to the League of Oregon Cities, and we have access to their attorneys as well. So they provide backup. And as you know, many of you know that I used to work for an arm of them, and that was one of our jobs as the grunts, is that we would do that research for the legal staff to get to the cities that provided that service. So we have a number of opportunities to get additional legal help if we need it. And your request, Commissioner O'Donnell, about checking in with the league, well, that's all part of that membership package that we pay every year to have that expertise, because they are kind of the keepers of, here's what all the cities are thinking. And they have access to all of that information, which is nice on computer, that you can get that. So that's another avenue that I think is a real benefit, to our jurisdiction that we have access to.
And I would note that I actually have called them individually and identified myself, and I had no difficulties conversing with an attorney on staff. So for all of us.
They're very helpful. Back in the day, you would have gotten somebody like me. You would have called and they would have...
About that, I would say click burr.
Well, we did a good job on assessing what the thing was and then passing it up the line. But, we had to take all the notes. We were, like I said, we were the hired help back there in the back room.
All right, so I think we've covered this one.
Yes.
So at this point, I'm considering this done for now?
Yes.
Yes, I
Okay,
think so.
thank you.
Thank you for bringing it to us as requested, Mr. Conkle. So we are moving on the agenda to the city manager's report.
I do not have any updates for tonight, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move.
I have a question, though.
Okay.
You were talking to us after we shut down the incident command center with regard to the wildfires, and you were going to circle back with us on how they were working on the 360, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yes, we need to do that still. We've spent some time putting together the paperwork necessary for the reimbursement on the wind damage. So I think we're getting our feet back under us, although Chief Band just jumped in. He may have done some stuff with his folks. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything, Jim.
Well, I can say that in terms of a county-wide, I'm on the board of the 911 center, and we're looking at having conversations about doing a paid thing county-wide, having a third party come in, people who normally do this and kind of helping us do a rundown of what happened and a sort of a critical incident debrief that is more formal about lessons learned that would include cities, but then also the entire countywide effort that I think would be of a lot of value. And we're having a conversation about just how to pay for that, which should happen. I think we have a meeting next week, and we're looking to get that thing kicked off. And I think that will be probably take a month to get done, but everyone will have access to that.
And I think also, while we're fortunate enough that we've moved through that phase of the response, and we're in the all clear at this point, they are still addressing Beachy Creek, Lionhead are still, a percentage contained, 60, 70, 80. I'm not sure where they're at right now. So, they are still actively addressing those fires, as well as the, damage cleanup, damage assessment, getting FEMA down there. So, while we're done as Oregon City for the most part, other than the paperwork and the follow-up, there are still active emergency responses going on.
Yeah, I was just referring to us, and I'm assuming Chief Band will give us a synopsis of what the countywide review is, and did want to add, it sounds like Chief Band doesn't have any pictures on his wall yet because it's pretty echoey in there. It sounded like he was kind of calling from a cave.
He didn't ask for carpet like John Lewis did.
He doesn't have any carpet?
Not like John Lewis does.
Oh.
Oh, boy. Now I'm gonna jump on the, rein it in.
I also agree with, I can see an after-action report, what went well, what didn't go so well. Understanding we operated within the constraints and actions imposed upon us by other jurisdictions, specifically state, county, fire marshal, and others. But I think the focus in Oregon City is the evacuation and what occurred and how can we improve that. And
exactly.
Sure, there's all kinds of theoretical things, concentric circles from the out in, but how do you control panic? But I think that'll be the focus from the Oregon City perspective is if it took you an hour to get from the top of the hill to 99, you want to know what can we do better next time? And I don't know.
Yeah, the exodus, as I call it.
Yeah, I have more on that, but I don't think now's the time. So we're going to move on to commission committee reports. Commissioner O'Donnell, Beaver Creek Employment Area, Blue Ribbon
I have
Committee.
nothing new to report on that subject.
Okay, Brownfield Grant Committee is the mayor. Is there no alternate? I don't think there's an alternate.
No.
All right, Citizen Involvement Committee, that's myself. There was a CIC meeting last week, and it was full of presentations. And I would say it went pretty well. The main issue for them is that I think all of the neighborhoods are struggling with the virtual environment. And some of them plan to have meetings, even set up tents outside and all of that. And then the wildfire came and it was smoky and the wind blew away their tents. So then you had so all of the neighborhood associations are kind of feeling, I think, some strain through this time because of just dealing with this virtual environment and not being able to meet. Some are no longer allowed to meet where they were meeting, if they were meeting in a retirement facility, so they have no, they're trying to find somewhere else to meet. So I guess that's my only comment, mainly of just knowing that they're having some struggles, and I don't know if there are additional extensions of how we could help them, if that's a conversation for us to have. I know that line is kind of gray. It feels kind of gray of, they're their own autonomous groups versus where we support. And I know we provide staff to support, and we support the CIC, but the individual neighborhood associations just are struggling. So I think it's hard for them to serve the role in doing their land use reviews as part of goal 1 when they are even unable to meet and get the word out, or they're struggling. Some are not, they're not all equal. So just kind of heads up, something to think about. But the CIC has not, I don't believe they have all complained. I'll say complained in a nice way. They've all vented their frustration and their struggles to each other, but they have, and to my knowledge, they haven't come to the city commission or via our liaison through Christina saying, is there anything the city could do? So just raising the awareness of, we were struggling to have some active ones, and now, we still have some, they're still struggling.
Commissioner Lyle-Smith, I'm aware that a couple of the neighborhood associations are having difficulty because they aren't a host for Zoom. So right. They haven't been able to set it up. And so maybe, I'm just suggesting it, maybe there's a way we could assist with that to help a particular point person get that set up, because mostly everybody has computers, but if nobody's is the host, they can't have a meeting. And that's one of the things I heard from a couple of folks out in the Tower Vista, South End area. Mm-hmm. And I said,
so, and that's kind of what I mean. It's like, is there an additional arm of extension of help that we could give to them to help with some of the virtual? Some don't have any problems with it at all. Some really don't, are struggling with it. And they're, so they don't have tech support. They don't have all, so it's a question for us of how much we support our neighborhood associations. And we have this conversation regularly. We fund them, to help with postcards and stuff like that. But I think if this is going to continue in this virtual environment, it's something for us to consider for those that are really struggling and unable to do it on their own.
Nope, I would agree.
So I don't know, Ms. Turway, if that's something you could talk to Christina about and see if she has any feedback or if she has any ideas on that. That's just kind of my takeaway. I know, we want to support them, but. All right, that was my update. Clackamas County Coordinating Committee, that's Mayor Dan Holliday, and I'm the alternate. I would say the main activities that I'm aware of for C4 and our Clackamas County Coordinating is a response, mainly lots of conversations about the tolling project and the communities along I-205. We submitted a letter. We agreed as a commission, and City Manager Tony Conkle submitted the letter, but C4 from representing all of Clackamas County has also submitted a letter. There have been Wes Lynn has also sent a letter. So there's coordination in that body of elected officials in trying to provide comment back to ODOT about the tolling project. That's been a pretty active conversation. The other item that they are talking about right now is on the flip side of that, of opposing the tolling, the flip side of that is trying to support regional transportation funding for the transit piece, where we want transit connections. We had the presentation last week from the Clackamas County person, and I can't think of her name, but she gave a good presentation about that last mile. So there's lots of conversations going on about connecting our cities in this area of Clackamas County with trying to improve our transit. And so there's some letters of support coming from our coordinating, from the elected officials trying to support projects.
Is there any way we could get copies of those letters from the other cities, and whether we can give them, I'm assuming we've given them ours, but maybe we haven't, but just to show more of a kind of a coordinate. I'd be interested in seeing what, Wes Lynn had to say about it, or county, or just because we're all kind of in that same boat together.
Yeah, I may have a couple of them. I'm also part of a separate group that's not Clackamas County Coordinating Committee. And this is a group being organized with Representative Mark Meek, Representative Rachel Prusak, myself, Christine Lewis from Metro. And this is kind of more of a political strategy, and they have gathered the letters, and I provided the letter that we approved as a city commission to ODOT, but they also wanted to see all of the letters, so I know that group has been collecting them, and I provided ours to them. But it's more of a political strategy group to talk about how our representatives like Mark Meek, Rachel Prusak, Metro Councilor Christine Lewis can carry our message, or make sure, we can strategize about messaging with the legislature and other bodies of elected officials on these issues that are affecting Oregon City and our region in Clackamas County. But
I think that 205 tolling piece needs to be watchdog closely. And here we are, probably first among equals as far as the impact on this city. And at some point, do we respond individually or as a group with our companion cities in whatever means necessary?
Commissioner Smith?
In addition to that, I feel like it's been piecemealed in one. Here's the Abernathy Bridge project, not talking about tolling. Here's the tolling project, not talking about the Abernathy project. And here is this new one,
the bike
ped thing on the Oregon City Westland Bridge, which they're all the same damn conversation. And I have a feeling that we all have a strong opinion on all three of them. And so that one is just coming on the radar now. Are we going to get a report at some point on that and what that part of it from the state? I don't know.
I thought our
but
letter
That
included
part being the
that.
pedestrian
the
component?
bridge,
Yeah,
the
I thought our
Oregon City
letter
Westland
included
Bridge.
that we weren't like thrilled about that either.
Well, I think that there
Well-
was STIP money identified. I don't know that I think they've put an RFP out.
Yes.
I can have Dana give an update. I don't think they're at a point where they're actually kicking off the project with consultant work yet. It was earmarked out of STIP funding to do a feasibility study of a pedestrian crossing from Westland to Oregon City at some location, including looking at the existing bridge versus a new bridge. But I don't think that any of that work has started yet.
No,
So,
it hasn't started.
so I guess my concern is this. Never was I aware that it involved possibly the Oregon City Westland Bridge. It was always kind of, and if you look in some of the paperwork on our website that, blatantly has our logo on it, it kind of talks about an additional bridge, and we've talked about an additional bridge in the mill site properties in the past and things like that. I'm worried that the state's then kind of just going to assume that we mean the same thing by, saying that we would support that use on the Oregon City Westland Bridge. And I don't know that that's the case. I would hate them to take this openness to talk about a bike pedestrian bridge topic and put them together with doing that on the Oregon City Westland Bridge. I think people are going to be very vocal about it, and I think we as a city might be very vocal on that too. So I think they're kind of being careful with how they've worded it because they don't want us to really know that that's the plan, but clearly we can't trust them in the way that they've gone about the other presentations and steps forward. So I think we should be proactive in stating whether or not we as a city support that or not, or at least be aware of what their thinking is. Because I think we, probably have some input we would like to share on that.
Yeah, so I agree with you that I think the way it hit the news kind of caught a number of people flat-footed, and the reason the reason it hit the news was because other committees needed to vote on the funding piece. I know John Lewis is available and probably could speak to this, but my understanding is there was supposed to be a pedestrian piece of the I-205 project. It's been left out. ODOT recognized that they were supposed to have a pedestrian piece as part of their project. They identified some money that wasn't being used. Because it's federal dollars, it has to flow through Metro because we're in the Metro boundary. Therefore, it had to get Metro's blessing, Metro's vote. There were some comments online of why is Metro involved and why are they dictating this project? It's my understanding is that was really checking a box. It's a pass-through of federal funds. It has to go through Metro. Metro has to check that box. So that's why these other committees were voting on that. I think Mr. Conkle is correct in that the project really hasn't started yet, and I think we will have ample opportunity to provide public comment and feedback on what we think should or shouldn't happen on the bridge, the arch bridge. It definitely garnered a lot of public comment on our side as well as West Lynn. I know I talked to Metro Councilor Christine Lewis, and she said there was also a lot of social comments happening on the West Lynn side of concern about that bridge. So I think there will be a lot of support for having a very robust conversation when that project kicks off. But yes, it did surprise us, and I know I reached out to John Lewis and Dana when I saw it online. John, I don't know. I see you on camera. I don't know if you have anything you want to add. I kind of gave a quick summary.
I thought you did a great job. I would say that, any kind of study that's talking about a new either pedestrian or vehicle bridge, kind of has to look at all the options. It wouldn't be a complete study if it didn't look at, kind of what was reported, which was the shock and awe of that. I mean, I think that's what sometimes reporters do. So we got a little bit of that shock and awe, but I don't think that there's any preconceived decision on that at all. I don't believe that. The one thing that I do get frustrated with is I think there is a preconceived decision that we weren't consulted on not including bike and pedestrian facilities on the I-205 bridge expansion project. That's where it belongs, and that's where it should have been. And without really communicating with the local communities, ODOT made that decision on their own. And I think this study is as a result of that decision.
A compromise of sorts.
Other than that.
Yes. Okay, thank you, John. Anything else? So just to put a bow on that. So in the last couple of weeks, we learned of the article. I saw the conversations online about this. I followed up with some of them online on some of the Facebook groups. I appreciate the city for standing up the project page on that to try to help get the word out about this project that kind of seemed to fall out of the air. Thank you for forwarding the information about the project to the rest of the city commission to kind of give an overview.
And I think that's one of the things we struggled with when we tried to update social media to address it, was that typically we would point people to a place to be able to do public participation, right?
Right.
But because we're so far ahead of that, there is nowhere to point people at this point other than to say, stay involved, stay informed. When we get to there, we will push you to the right places to be able to participate.
Right.
Interesting. I received information about it ahead of time as well, but it was through the Bicycle Alliance folks that somebody forwarded it to me and said, hey, do you know about this? It's going on. And I go, what? So yeah. I responded in that way and said, no, that this project was just starting and this was not a foregone conclusion. And we were not closing the bridge down, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my comment.
Okay.
Okay, so lots going on in the Clackamas coordinating as far as the, that group focuses pretty heavily on transportation. And so lots going on there. All right, so Clackamas Heritage Partners, Commissioner Smith?
Don't have anything to report.
Okay.
We got an email today, though, yesterday from Gail.
Yeah, an update.
Her quarterly reports. I'm happy. I'm really excited, waiting on the new film to be ready.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's close to being ready.
I don't know when our next meeting is, but it's coming along.
Yeah. I can't wait to see it. Downtown Oregon City Association, Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, the board is in the process of putting together sort of a low-key kiosk ribbon cutting. And I believe that they're looking at maybe, I'm going to say November the 13th, but they'll let the city know because they're coordinating that with John, I believe. If you're still there, John, yes, I think that's what I was told. As I mentioned at the last meeting, the marble drop is next week, and I'll be trying to participate in that as much as I can, throwing marbles into the box so that they win. The other thing that they're doing is taking a look at their last review with the City Commission and going over revamped plans for how we proceed in 2021 under the current circumstances that we are under. They have been responsive to the business owners in terms of getting back to people about how they can receive assistance. They've spread the information about the newest offering by our Economic Development Department, and they have been meeting pretty regularly through everything. So we have been meeting all along, which has been good. So there's been no break in that.
Okay. Next up is the Metro Policy Advisory Committee. That's my committee. And we did have an impact meeting on September 23rd. There were a couple of items to note. You all will remember that the Metro had a park bond that was on the May ballot, I believe, that passed. So they are currently working on an oversight committee There is a local share program where we typically receive money from Metro to support parks. So the next step will be IGAs with the local share partners. So I'm sure the city will be hearing from them if they haven't already on that. The housing measure, which also passed Metro, in the Metro area, they are assembling an oversight committee for the housing dollars as well. If you're interested in oversight, applications actually go to the county commission for approval. So the county generally is our primary point person for housing dollars, and if we had any housing projects, we would be working with Clackamas County on that, but we don't have any teed up. I think some of the other Clackamas County cities do. There is a new EPA Regional Resilience project that's been going on, and the goal is to, if you all will recall, we received, I believe it was within the last year, a presentation from Mr. Lewis and Ms. Turway on our natural hazard mitigation plan. This is an effort to try to coordinate the cities, the metro region, for a regional natural hazard mitigation plan to talk about things. And their two issues are wildfire, extreme heat and wildfire, and the intersection of climate equity and public health. So obviously we all experienced wildfire issues recently and the smoke as a region. And so this is an effort to try to see how are we as a region working on our mitigation efforts to some natural disasters and using these as a starting point. I forwarded the information that I received onto city staff. And then last but not least, they are updating their regional waste standards, service standards, where that's going to touch us. So essentially they're doing some cleanup of their codes, but they are proposing some new rules for multifamily residential. So this is like container standards and service standards. I also forwarded information on that. I think our Public Works Department was already on top of it, but for me, I hear about some of these things, and it's just a pass through to make sure that we know about some of these regional and metro initiatives, and that our staff are participating if they are interested. And that is it for impact. Next is the Oregon Governor's Willamette Falls Locks Commission, which is Mayor Dan Holliday. I don't think there's been any activity on the Locks Commission either.
Didn't they have a meeting earlier, like in the summer? I thought there was some meeting that they recent within the last 2 to 3 months.
I'm not aware of it.
I'm
I was
not
looking
aware.
at Mr.
Does
Turway.
Mr. Ray have an
You gave an
update?
update, didn't you? You had attended it, the mayor had not, the last time we gave updates.
Yeah, they were moving forward with the public corporation.
Right, okay, that's what I thought. But the money's still there, right?
The money's there, the public corporation.
Yeah.
I don't think the money was ever there. I think the money was
was a
waiting on the public
public
incorporation.
corporation, and then we had
in order
COVID.
to
Yeah,
get the
okay.
money. I think that was the holdup, the main
Okay.
holdup from the legislature.
Yeah.
South Fork Water Board,
We did not meet
Commissioners?
in September.
I heard they got a new staff person.
We are looking forward to meeting a new
Yes.
CEO. We hear he can be a particularly difficult individual. We can't disclose his name, but his initials are Wyatt Parno.
Wow, those are some heavy initials.
We're looking forward to working with Wyatt, as we always have in the past here.
yes. Okay, Willamette Falls and Landings Heritage Area, Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, the organization, again, has continued to meet throughout since the beginning of the year. They are working, trying to shift all of their activities to virtual. And to that end, they have a virtual event coming up on the 23rd, which they're calling Invites You to an Evening of Spirits and Spirits. So it's being sponsored by the Ewing Young Distillery. And there apparently is going to be an encounter with Ewing Young, and that will be interesting. Also, there will be an aspect of the program that will deal with the Native American contribution in the area. What I am particularly working on right now with them is I'm on a subcommittee with 4 other members, including the chair, to develop a diversity, inclusion, and equity. Well, we have the policy, and we're working on the implementation of that. So they plan to shift focus of their programming and everything that they do so that it basically, I'll summarize, will talk about the stories of the underrepresented peoples in our area and in the heritage area. And that's something they feel very committed to, and they want to promote that.
Okay. Willamette Falls Legacy Project Liaisons. Commissioner O'Donnell?
We've had a number of meetings that were scheduled and subsequently canceled. Our next target date for a meeting is either, the choices available to us are October 21st and or 23rd, and those dates have not been firmed up yet.
Okay.
They also did submit a report as well.
Yeah, they submitted a monthly report via email that I think we all received. So.
I did have one thing that I wanted to back up to something that you talked about under item G, if I may. One of the minor concerns that I've had is that since the Metro Housing Bond has passed, we have had, unfortunately, very little contact with the county. And since they're taking the lead on this, I really feel that even if we don't have any projects teed up, that all the jurisdictions in the county need to be informed about what's going on and what they're planning. I know you said that there's an application available to get onto this oversight committee, but I really think that jurisdictionally, we need to be informed, and I think that the process needs to really recognize the fact that this money is out there, and yes, the county has the oversight, but it's really it's really a citywide county coordination and what's the word I want to use? Cooperation that needs to occur with this, even if, like I said, even if we don't have any projects teed up. I think it's just really important that we all are on the same page with regard to this, because I know I talked to a person who's working on the 2 projects there out in the Milwaukee area, and the comment was, well, I think the money's already gone. And I go, what do you mean the money's already gone? So I just had it's been allocated, and I thought, well, great. How do we know about that? I think it's just important that we coordinate with them, that we get informed about what the process is, what they're doing, what they're thinking, and that I just like to see a little more cooperation there.
So my understanding is that all of the counties, including Clackamas County, is supposed to be creating a local implementation plan in order to address how they're going to oversee the funds that we receive from Metro, how they're going to evaluate projects that are submitted by the city. I do think there are some cities that already had some projects teed up. Mm-hmm. And this is a multi-year funding effort where revenues are coming into Metro. So that comment may be because the initial projections of revenue that's coming in, because there's already projects lined up from folks like the city of Milwaukee, they probably are likely already targeted toward those projects. But there will be additional revenues over time that will continue to come in, and Clackamas County's role is to come up with a framework for how that money comes in, how projects are submitted. So we still have an opportunity a couple of years from now, if we had the inclination at this time that we wanted to work on a housing project, or try to move something forward, that we could start preparing that, and then by the time we had that ready, we could follow the framework that the local implementation plan is supposed to lay out. I don't believe the local implementation plan for Clackamas County is completed. I have not heard that. In fact, I think they're probably all still just starting that.
Well, again, how are we and I'm going to speak generally about we as the cities, how are we involved in that? I mean, is it only on a staff level? Is it on a policy level? I mean, I guess I would like to know what the thinking is, because my brain has already been thinking about a possible 2 project areas that, I mean, I haven't really talked about it with anybody, but just in my mind, I think, well, this piece of property would be really good. And I think it ties into what we're talking about, our housing inventory with the comp plan, but I don't necessarily think we have to wait for the comp plan. The property's already planned and zoned, but it all ties in. But again, I'd like to get a better understanding of what the big picture is so that we're not caught. But I also want to make sure that we have the ability to input into this process.
Right.
Fine and dandy if the county says, oh, well, we're going to come up with it. Well, who are you talking to? What are the things that you're thinking about? What do the cities have to say about it? Because it's not just about you, my friends at Clackamas County. It's about everybody in the county.
Well, and that's where this oversight committee comes in. I think they want to get representation from across the city, and ultimately the county commission is deciding, who's on this committee. I'm afraid I don't know much more than what I've already told you, and I'm looking at Ms. Turway. I don't know if you've heard about this. I really think this is still kind of in its infancy, but I agree with you. I hope that we hear more from the county, and would welcome some more information when they start putting that together.
I don't even care if they don't have anything planned yet, but just, it would be nice to have somebody come and say, well, here's kind of what we're thinking. We're at the very beginning stages. We want to let you know kind of what we're thinking. We want to do this committee, we want to do this.
Right.
Just kind of get us in at the ground level so that we can all grow into this together.
Right.
Because I don't want to see the money just sort of, well, you guys didn't get involved. Well,
Right.
I
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I at least want to know where our opportunities are to potentially take advantage of monies that's coming into Clackamas County.
And if we're involved in the beginning of the process, we have a better opportunity to ascertain what that will be.
Sure.
We can reach out to our contacts at HHS.
Okay.
And
That would be
Okay.
fantastic.
That would be great.
see what we can find out.
All right.
We love
And
you,
is
Clackamas County.
there anything else from the commissioners? All right. And with that, I think we're adjourned.